Welcome to this lesson, and in this lesson we are going to be studying about logic and how you can use them together with the Java conditions or the if and else statements. So the logical operators, as we studied earlier in an earlier lesson, we have the logical AND written with two ampersand signs. So this one is the logical AND. We also have the logical OR written with two pipe signs, represented by two pipe signs. So we have this one is the logical OR, and we also have the logical NOT, represented as such, exclamation mark or the NOT sign, and an equal sign. So this one is the logical NOT. So how can we be able to use them together with the if statements or the condition statements? So let's start with the logical AND, and in this case we are going to take the example of a student's grading system and see just a simple student grading system and see what we can be able to achieve with it. So we are going to define a variable, an integer variable called pass mark. Pass mark, we are going to define it as 75. So for a student who have passed, they have to have attained either 75 or above. And we are going to define another variable, student score. Student score, let's in this case give the student 80% that is, and find out if the score of the student is between 75 and 100, we are going to say that the student has gotten or has attained a grade A. So if pass mark, if student score is greater than or equal to the pass mark, and so here is the use of the logical AND. We're going to explain how it evaluates, and student score is less than or equal to 100, assuming a student can even score 100 marks, then we can say system.out.println grade is student grade A. Grade A. So we are going to say that the student's grade is A, else we can say something like grade B or something. But of course we should have a grading mechanism which we can implement later. This is only for your learning purposes. We can say grade, let's just say other grade. Good, so let's run our program and find out what it gives us as output. It should tell us that the student has achieved a grade A, and true to its word, says the student has achieved a grade A. So that is how you use the logical AND. And what happens with the logical AND is that both statements have to be true. For instance, the first statement which we are checking whether it's a true or false is whether the student score is greater than or equal to the pass mark. So for instance, in this case, both of them have to evaluate to true. If either of them evaluates to a false, then that is automatically a false. So if we have true and true, then that is going to be true. That is for the logical AND. If we have false and true, the overall is going to be a false. And if we have a true and a false, the overall is also going to be a false. So what do you learn from this is that it is only going to be for the logical AND, it only executes or it only returns a true whenever both statements are true. So for instance, we can have let's try a statement where, or a condition where, one of these conditions is going to evaluate to false. But before we do that, let's think through. We have the student score greater than or equal to pass mark, which is 75. So it has to be greater than or equal to the pass mark. So for this one, let's retain it as a true. But for the last one, For the second condition, let's make it false. And what we are checking for is that it has to be less than or equal to 100. So we have not checked the condition for whether it's greater than 100. So if we give greater than 100, then that condition should be false. So let's give the example. Let's try with 120 so that we can actually see the logical AND in working. So let's see what it gives us. So it tells us that it is an other grade, and basically what is happening here is that because the first condition is true, the first condition here is true, however the second condition evaluates to false, the overall if statement returns false, and therefore it does not execute this block of statements and automatically goes to the else part, which tells us that that grade is another grade which we do not know of, and not that one. So I hope with that simple explanation you've been able to understand about the logical and. So let's go, let's evaluate something else, the logical or. So let me clear that so that we can learn about the logical or. So for the logical or, we are still going to use the same, only that it applies a different concept, or it evaluates differently. So we are going to say if student score is greater than or equal to the pass mark, or remember how we represent the logical or, 2 pipe size, or student score is less than or equal to 100, then we should print out something. So let's print out that system out println, let's just say grade A, else this could be just another grade. Other grade. Good. So let's see what this evaluates to. Similar values, similar inputs as for the logical AND, but it's going to evaluate different. So in this case, it tells us that the student has a grade A for a student score of 120. Remember, when we use the same input for the logical AND, it evaluated to a false, and that's because for the logical AND, as we said earlier, both statements have to be true for the overall if statement to be false, or for the overall condition to be true. However, for the logical OR, it evaluates slightly differently in that if any of the statements is true, then the overall condition is true. If so the only time it is false is when all of the statements are false. So for instance, in this case, if we have a true and a true, the overall is a true. That's how it evaluates. If we have a false and a true, the overall is going to be a true, because as long as one of the conditions is true, the overall is going to be true. If we also have a true and a false, the overall is going to be true. The only time it's ever false is when everything is false. So if we have false and false, so this one is going to be false. So with that simple explanation, I hope you understand how the logical OR evaluates. I hope you have understood how the logical OR and the logical AND evaluate differently. So they are slightly different. So what happens is that in your programming, or whenever you're developing systems, you use the logical AND whenever you want to make the condition very, very strict, in that it has to, all the conditions have to evaluate to true. So for the logical AND is quite strict. For the logical OR, just any of the statements. And remember, you can have multiple conditions. So you don't just have to have one condition or two conditions. You can have multiple conditions which you are evaluating for. So let's now check for the final one, which is the logical NOT. How do we do that? Again, let me clear the code for the logical OR so that we can find out for the logical NOT. So for the logical NOT, it simply evaluates whether something is not. So for instance, if someone is how do we put this one? Let me just use a case, let me retain the case example for the grading students instead of looking for another example. So if someone has not attained the pass mark, then we can just say they have not passed the exam, or maybe they should take a, they should resit the exam. So let's do that. If student score is not equal to the pass mark, is not equal to the pass mark. I had a typo there. If student score is not equal to the pass mark, please note the logical not, then we can tell the student, or our Java program is going to output, our Java program is going to tell us that should take a receipt. Student to take a receipt, an exam receipt. So let's run and find out. So our student score, let's assume they scored, let's say 40%. So it is obviously not equal to the pass mark. So our Java program tells us student to take an exam receipt, and that is basically because the student score, which is 40, is obviously not equal to the pass mark. So basically, in the key takeaways from this video is the logical and, the logical or, and the logical not, and how you can be able to use them in the condition statements in the Java if-else condition statements. So thank you for staying with us in this lesson. Keep learning. See you in the next video.